The room went silent the moment I walked in. My father chuckled under his breath, the way he always did when he thought he'd already won. My mother shook her head, slow, tired, like she'd run out of ways to be disappointed in me. I didn't say a word. I'd learned long ago that speaking only gave them something else to twist. Years of small humiliations had taught me how to stand still, how to take the hit without flinching. Every sigh, every rolled eye, every time they pretended not to hear me, that was its own kind of violence. But something in me shifted that morning. Maybe it was the way my father smirked, or how my mother couldn't even look at me. Maybe it was because I finally realized they'd never see me for who I was, only for who they decided I'd failed to be. So I straightened my back, took one steady breath, and let the silence burn hotter than their judgment. I'd kept my peace long enough, and they had no idea what that silence was about to cost them. The blade in my hand caught a sliver of morning light as I ran the cloth down its edge, the motion slow, deliberate, steady. It was the same blade I'd carried halfway across the world once, back when discipline meant survival. Now it was just habit. That's when I heard it. The soft scrape of paper sliding through the door. A single envelope, thick and official, lay on the floor. The seal read, Gallatin County Court, Montana. My pulse didn't quicken, it just stopped for a moment. I tore it open, the paper trembling slightly against my fingers. Plaintiffs, Richard and Elaine Cross. Defendant, Wilhelmina Cross. 15 years. 15 years of silence. And this was how they chose to reach me. Not a call, not a word. A lawsuit. The smell of coffee filled the air as I sat at the table, the old shepherd at my feet. Ranger lifted his head just long enough to see I wasn't moving, then went back to sleep. I stared at the words, Petition for Property Division, Cross Ranch, that land. My grandfather's hands had built it, plow by plow, fence by fence. He used to say honor isn't what you say, it's what you keep when nobody's watching. When he died, the will left it to me. My father never argued, not out loud. He just threw the letter in the fire and walked away. Now here it was again, the past clawing back, wrapped in legal ink. I stood, the ache in my left knee flaring like it always did when rain was coming. In the corner, the old supply chest waited. When I lifted the lid, the scent of salt, oil, and worn leather hit like memory. The uniform was still there, navy blue, brass buttons dulled by time. I ran my thumb along the collar seam, remembering the day I stitched it back after the funeral that changed everything. Maybe they'd finally see who I'd become. Not through words, not through apology, but through what I'd carry into that courtroom. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I dialed. Gallatin County Court. How may I help you? This is Wilhelmina Cross. I received a summons. Yes. The plaintiffs are my parents. There was a pause, then a soft reply. Ma'am, you'll need to appear in person. I hung up, looked east toward the mountains, where the sky always seemed sharper, cleaner, harder. All right, then. I'd go home. But not as the daughter they remembered, 15 years earlier. Cross Ranch was everything to me. Every morning my grandfather, Arthur Cross, and I walked along the creek, the air cold enough to sting. He'd stop halfway, lift his chin toward the hills, and say the wind here tells the truth. When it goes quiet, Mina, that means you stopped listening to it, and to yourself. My father never understood that. He saw the ranch as potential profit, not heritage. He wanted cabins, investors, guided hunts. My grandfather refused. For him, the land wasn't business, it was a promise. Their fights filled every wall of that house. I used to stand between them, wishing I could choose one without betraying the other. The day I told my father I'd enlisted, he laughed like it was a bad joke. The world's full of stronger men, he said. They'll crush you before you learn how to fight back. I told him maybe they'd have to work harder than that. When I graduated, my grandfather sent a small box. Inside was his silver badge, the eagle wings spread wide, and a note that said, "You earned it." I carried it through 2 tours. He never lived to see me wear it. He died while I was deployed. No one called. I found out through an email from Ruth, our old neighbor. Your father said you were too busy saving the world. When I finally came home, I drove past the cemetery. His name wasn't there. Ruth just looked at me, silent. When I asked why, a week later, a lawyer mailed me a copy of his will. Every acre of the ranch was left to me. My father never spoke about it. I didn't return. I just kept paying the property taxes and insurance each year. Quietly, faithfully, like a ritual of debt to the man who'd believed in me. Now that I'd been sued for abandonment, I finally understood. They didn't want the ranch. They wanted to erase the only thing that still tied me to him. I opened my financial records, each payment stamped and signed. At the bottom of the file, folded between receipts, was one of my grandfather's old letters. The ink was faint, but I could still read it. If they ever come for the land, don't fight for me. Fight for what it meant. The paper trembled in my hand as the night wind slipped through the open window. It brushed against my cheek like a breath that hadn't aged at all. Later that week, I called the courthouse. The clerk's voice crackled through the receiver. Representative, Mr. Lucas Cross. My brother. For a long moment I said nothing. I could still see him at 10 years old, chasing me across the pasture with a wooden rifle, laughing so hard he tripped over his own feet. When I shipped out for the first time, I sent him a knife engraved with 2 words. Stay sharp. Now he'd signed his name against mine. 2 days later, I flew home. The plane dipped over the valley, and Montana unfolded beneath the clouds. Endless grass, broken fences, the same kind of silence that holds its breath before a storm. The town hadn't changed. The diner still carried my mother's name. Elaine's Pie Stop, its sign bleached by years of sun. Through the fogged window, I saw her wiping down the counter. When her eyes met mine, she froze. The cloth fell from her hand. She turned away before I could lift mine. That night, Ruth knocked on my motel door, rain streaking her glasses. She handed me a yellowed envelope. Arthur wrote this before he passed. She whispered. Inside was one line. Mina. If they forget what Cross stands for, remind them. Don't let pride burn this family to ash. I turned the envelope over and felt something pressed inside. A photograph. Old and faded. My grandfather stood beside a young soldier in uniform, both smiling, both wearing identical silver rings. On the back, in smeared ink, were the words, To Colin Reeves, from a brother in arms. The name meant nothing to me then, but I'd hear it again soon, in a courtroom, spoken with the kind of gravity that changes everything. I set the photograph on the table, the lamplight glinting off the faint outline of that silver ring, and said under my breath, Looks like the wind's still talking. 3 days later, I left Seattle before dawn. The old truck rattled down the highway, and with every mile the air thinned, sharper, colder, like the past breathing down my neck. By the time I crossed into Montana, the sign that read, Welcome to Gallatin County, looked less like a greeting than a reminder. Some places don't forgive you for leaving. Cross Ranch sat hollow in the valley, the fence caved in, weeds shoulder high. I stepped out, boots sinking into the dirt my grandfather once turned with his bare hands. Inside the house, the walls smelled of dust and loss. His portrait was gone. On the mantel sat a pile of papers. Bank records stamped Gallatin National, signed by my father. The date, 2017. The purpose, equine operations. But Cross Ranch had never seen a horse. That afternoon, I went to the diner on Main. Ruth was behind the counter. She didn't smile, only nodded once, the way people do when they know a wound's still open. Lucas sat in the corner, sleeves rolled up, tie crooked. I slid into the booth. You came back, he said. Didn't seem like much of a choice. He leaned forward. Dad's just trying to protect the family name. Protect it. By selling what built it. He went quiet. Eyes down. Then he said it. About the gambling debts, the loan, the out-of-state buyer. Mom knew. She stayed silent. I asked if he knew I'd been paying taxes all these years. He nodded once. Dad said you did it out of guilt. I left without another word. On the ridge, the wind hit hard, bending the grass flat. I took out my grandfather's letter, the one I'd nearly memorized. If they forget what cross stands for. I looked at the ranch glowing under the dying sun. Then I'll remind them. In his old office, the drawer still stuck halfway. I pried it open and found a folded land map marked with a silver X. Beneath it, a tin box waited. Inside lay the original will, sealed and notarized by the county clerk, the one my father never wanted found. Tomorrow, I'd bring it to court. The wind outside howled like applause. The courthouse smelled of pine and polish, its walls heavy with silence. I walked in wearing my uniform, faded, pressed, steady. Every whisper stopped when I entered. My father sat up front, smug behind his lawyer's table. My mother looked small beside him. Lucas sat between them, already breaking apart. Case 238C, Cross versus Cross. The clerk announced, Commander Wilhelmina Cross, representing herself, I said. My father laughed under his breath. Still pretending to be a soldier, huh? I didn't flinch. The judge, Colin Reeves, looked up, eyes narrowing at the ring on my hand. Arthur Cross's granddaughter? He asked. I nodded. My father frowned. You knew my father? Reeves leaned back. We served together. He saved my life in Hugh, 1968. Silence filled the room. I set the folder on the table. The will, tax records. Every payment made from my Navy pension. Reeves read them, then looked at my father. This mortgage, your signature? My father hesitated. She left, he said. Someone had to protect it. Protect it by selling it. I thought. My mother tried to speak, but Lucas touched her arm, stopping her. For the first time, he looked at me and didn't look away. Reeves closed the file. The court will recess to verify both wills. Then, softer. Commander, thank you for your service. The words landed heavier than any verdict. My father lowered his head. My mother's eyes lifted to mine, full of things she couldn't say. I placed my cap on the table, the metal clasp clicking against the wood like a full stop. Outside, sunlight burned bright on the courthouse steps. I stood still, breathing the clean air of a truth that no longer needed permission. That evening, my phone buzzed. Commander Cross? Speaking. Judge Reeves would like to meet you privately. He has something that belonged to your grandfather. I looked toward the mountains, snow turning gold in the fading light. The wind swept through the valley, cold and clear, whispering the same words my grandfather once did. The wind never lies. That night, after the first hearing, I met Judge Reeves at a cafe across from the courthouse. He sat near the window, shoulders curved, the weight of 2 wars on him. One fought with a rifle, one with the law. When I sat down, he said quietly that my grandfather once saved his life. From his pocket, he drew a silver badge engraved cross, edges worn from time. He'd found it in Hughes, 1968. If you ever meet my granddaughter in uniform, Arthur had told him, give it back. The metal felt cold against my skin, a bridge between generations. Then Reeves's tone changed. Someone had sent an anonymous letter urging the court to close my case quickly. The signature was Lucas Cross. The words burned. That night, rain slammed against the cabin roof. I found my mother waiting in the dark. Stop this, she said. He'll lose everything. They'll put him in prison. I asked if she knew about the stolen insurance funds. She wept. He said it was to save the land, to protect his honor. Honor built on lies isn't honor, I told her. She confessed to signing false papers, terrified of losing him. Your father doesn't know how to face shame, she whispered. I placed my grandfather's letter before her. He did. Honor doesn't need to hide. It needs to stand. Next morning, I met Lucas. His eyes were hollow. He handed me a withdrawal letter. If you promise not to press charges, I'll file this today. I said I didn't want prison, just truth. When I stepped outside, The wind rose sharp and cold, my grandfather's voice in it, reminding me, the wind never lies. When the hearing resumed, the air felt heavier. Reporters filled the benches, cameras waiting. I stood in the hallway, watching the flag outside whip against the wind. Lucas appeared beside me, his voice tight. "You sure about this?" I said I was. Inside. My father stared at me from across the room. Pride hardened into fear. My mother sat still, hands folded. When Judge Reeves entered, silence fell. I presented the documents, loans, insurance withdrawals, every forged signature. Reeves read them, then looked at my father. "Your signature?" My father flushed. "I did what I had to. She left. Someone had to keep it alive." I said I had kept it alive for 15 years with my pension, not his debts. He slammed the table. "You think that uniform makes you better?" Reeves struck his gavel. "Order?" Then his tone softened. "Commander Cross, were you the officer who led Operation Alder Ridge, Syria, 2018? I nodded. "My son was one of the civilians you rescued," he said. The room went silent. "This court owes you respect." My father's jaw slackened. My mother's eyes filled. Lucas stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, I withdraw as counsel for the plaintiffs." "Sit down!" My father barked. "I'm done fighting the wrong war," Lucas said. Reeves closed the file. "Verdict next week." As I turned to leave, my father's voice cracked. "You won? Proud?" "No," I said. "I just wanted you to remember who you were. That night, fire consumed the main house. They called it an accident. But I knew better. I pulled him out of the smoke as rain began to fall. "Why would you save me?" he asked. "Because no one else ever did." Rain hissed through the ashes. The wind swept the valley clean. I woke in the town hospital to the faint sting of smoke still caught in my hair. My arm was bandaged, my knee throbbing where the old injury had flared. The doctor's voice faded behind me. When my eyes cleared, I saw Lucas in the corner, his face hollow. "Dad's alive," he said. "Smoke inhalation, nothing worse. If you hadn't, don't thank me." I cut in. "I just did what Grandpa would have done." Outside, rain fell steady over the ranch. The air smelled of wet earth and charred wood. Half the house was gone, blackened beams jutting through the haze. In the ashes, I found my grandfather's metal box, burned around the edges but unbroken. Inside was a photo of him and my father as a boy. On the back, in his shaky handwriting, "Don't let pride cost you your family." I knelt in the mud, the rain washing soot from my hands. "I hear you, Grandpa," I whispered. When court resumed, I wore the same uniform. My father sat in a wheelchair, my mother beside him. Judge Reeves reviewed the file, then said, "The court finds the original will valid. Cross Ranch belongs to Commander Wilhelmina Cross." I rose. I didn't fight for land. I fought for what it means. I submitted new papers, plans to turn the ranch into a PTSD recovery center for veterans. Reeves nodded. "Your grandfather would approve." And for the first time, my father wept. A week later, the ranch was quiet again. The ashes had cooled, and soft green shoots pushed through the blackened soil along the fence line. I rebuilt the old cabin using charred boards from the ruins. Just like Grandpa once said, "Build again, from what survived." By late afternoon, I heard a car stop outside. My father stepped out of the passenger seat, leaning on his cane instead of the wheelchair. His movements were slow but deliberate. In his hand was a silver pocket watch, scratched and worn. He held it out to me. "He left this for me, but I think it belongs to you now." Inside the lid was an engraving, "Honor returns when silence ends." His voice trembled. "You saved my life twice, once from the fire, once from myself," I told him softly. "You taught me pride. I had to unlearn it." He gave a frail laugh. "Guess we both lived long enough to fix it." After he left, my mother stayed. She pulled an old photo from her pocket, me as a little girl, sitting on Grandpa's shoulders. He said you had his eyes, steady, not scared. Then, quietly, "Your father watches that rescue clip on the news, every few months. I smiled. Then maybe he finally saw what he never wanted to see. Lucas came later. File in hand. I filed it. Veterans Havens approved. Thank you, I said. You didn't abandon us. Mina, we abandoned you. I touched his shoulder. We're all learning to come home. As the sun fell behind the hills, church bells echoed faintly. I opened the watch, the ticking steady beneath my thumb. Time still moving. Grandpa, I whispered, but this time, in the right direction. A year later, Cross Ranch had a new name, Cross Veterans Haven. The new house was built from old timber, its white walls bright against the open sky. The American flag waved above the porch, and the laughter of veterans carried from the back field as they planted vegetables and trained service dogs. I stood on the steps in my uniform, the same one that once felt heavy with pain, now fitting light and true. Beside me were my parents, Lucas, and Judge Reeves. Townspeople gathered around, the Montana wind soft across the fields. Once, I walked into court in this uniform to defend my honor. I said, today, I wear it to protect peace. My grandfather built this land with his hands. My father nearly lost it to pride. I rebuilt it with forgiveness. The applause rose, gentle and long. My father came forward, eyes quiet. You did good, Mina. Just finished what you taught me, I said. Then maybe this family finally started again. Later, I sat alone with Ranger at my feet. I opened Grandpa's pocket watch, sunlight glinting off the silver face, and etched one final line beneath the old engraving. Peace is the only victory worth keeping. The flag rippled above. The air was still, honest. And for the first time, I knew the wind was telling the truth.